Good afternoon. We are Group 5, and today we will be exploring Indigenous intellectual rights through the lens of the Amazonian Uru-Wow-Wow tribe, namely their conflict with Western companies' exploitation of their traditional medical knowledge of the tiki uba trees.
So, who are Indigenous people? Due to their vast diversity, the United Nations does not group together Indigenous people as a whole. They must, however, abide by certain criteria to be considered Indigenous. They must 1. Identify themselves as Indigenous at the individual and communal level, 2. Have historical continuity with pre-colonial societies, 3. Have a strong link to their natural resources and territory, 4. Have distinct languages, cultures, beliefs, and a societal, economic, and political system. And finally, resolve to maintain their ancestral environments as distinctive peoples and communities. All of these groups have strong traditions which bind them to their ancestors' way of life. Oftentimes, the discoveries, artwork, and general cultural practices are taken by people and companies, used for profit, and often even trademarked or patented. Anthropologist Dr. Daryl Posey even said that knowledge and traditional resources are central to the maintenance of identity for Indigenous peoples. Therefore, the control over these resources is of central concern in their struggle for self-determination. He further describes that the exploitation of their knowledge to be morally abhorrent in its parasitic nature. By creating a legal monopoly over a community's knowledge, a corporation can profit while rendering the Indigenous group helpless. Legally, their knowledge can be considered free and required no reimbursement. One way Indigenous people have resisted this exploitation is by considering a piece of information as traditional knowledge, or as defined by the World Intellectual Property Organization, the knowledge, know-how, skills, and practices that are developed, sustained, and passed on from generation to generation within a community, often forming part of its culture and spiritual identity. While traditional knowledge is not protected by conventional intellectual property systems, in certain cases it has been considered common knowledge of that group, and therefore cannot be owned in any way. In Western society, we often protect our traditional properties in food, agriculture, math, and medicine. This is why no one can patent calculus or simple medical practices such as pressuring a wound to slow bleeding.
The Uru-Wow-Wow are an indigenous people of Brazil, living across 6 villages with 3 subgroups. The first contact with non-natives occurred in 1981. After their first interactions, the tribe's population fell from 250 in 1981 to a mere 89 in 1993, due mostly to disease and conflicts over rubber trees and one of the world's largest tin deposits located on their lands. In 1993, their population began increasing after the Brazilian government implemented several tactics to protect their indigenous tribes. In 1986, National Geographic photographer Jesco von Puttkamer traveled deep into western Brazil to photograph the recently contacted tribe. He captured images of tribesmen bringing down tapirs with bows and arrows and the animals bleeding to death quickly. Due to his extensive experience with Amazonian tribes, Puttkamer immediately recognized that the Uri-Wow-Wow poisoned their arrows, nothing uncommon among Amazonian tribes. But while most Amazonian arrow poisons were extracted from the vines, it caused paralysis and suffocation. The poison the Wow-Wow used caused the animals to instead completely bleed out. The secret was the anticoagulant of red tiki uba tree resin. The discovery of the poison the Uri-Wow-Wow people used was far more distinctive and it turned out to be an invaluable pharmaceutical find. Blood thinners have and currently play a large role in medicine, and today bring in over $9 billion of profits worldwide. Puttkamer's photographs and journalist Lauren McIntry's article Last Days of Eden was published in National Geographic in 1988.
Soon after the publication, Merck Laboratories in New Jersey was able to isolate the active principle in the bark that inhibited thrombin, the basic protein of blood clots. When they published their findings, they did not cite the tribe nor a single Indigenous person.
D.A. Posey from Biodiversity, Genetic Resources, and Indigenous Peoples described the scenario saying, McIntry and Putkamer felt they were acting in the best interest of humankind when they described the Tiki Uba in their article. However, by doing so, they made it possible for a drug company to appropriate their knowledge without any obligations to compensate the Uru Wow Wow, who, in their present situation, could well find compensation highly beneficial. Due to the lack of technical character of the Uri Wow Wow's traditional medicine, their use of the Tika Uba tree resin did not fall under the patent criteria. Nor did they have the resources to patent or experience to know that they were a target to biopiracy. The case of the Wow Wow people provides a perfect example of the deep-rooted differences between how the two societies and how they view intellectual property. The Wow Wow people view their discoveries and practices as a shared traditional knowledge for the people, whereas Western society tries to claim the knowledge as their own, ensuring them to keep any of their discoveries to themselves, withheld and unshared with the community that they are a part of.
In conclusion, recently many biodiverse countries have proposed an amendment to combat biopiracy, namely to protect the rights of indigenous populations. This amendment adjusts the application to include the origin of traditional knowledge used in an invention, evidence of prior informed consent from relevant national authority to access and use traditional knowledge, and evidence of fair and equitable sharing of the benefits derived from such traditional knowledge. These amendments will attempt to prevent biopiracy and the exploitation of indigenous people, and finally give them adequate compensation to those deserving.